got a problem here.
Eject.
Anybody else catch the really bad advice in there? And how am I only just catching that now? Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. Eject into space without a flippin' spacesuit over the Death Star, which is gonna blow up in about 10 minutes.
Mike, but what if it's like space from Jimmy Neutron and there's a good reason why everyone can breathe in space?
What if it's like space from Treasure Planet?
The Ethereum.
Well, if that were true, there would be open cockpit spacecraft in Star Wars. Now,
Hold
wouldn't
on.
there?
You can
He
breathe
said
the air on this
cockpit.
planet, and we still close the cockpit on a plane.
I mean, true, but you still have like the early ones, like a Fokker DR1, Fokker D7. Why am I only just mentioning German aircraft?
Well,
They've been in space for like 25,000 years. I think they advanced beyond the Red Baron.
Well, if you're gonna mention Fokkers, you got to mention the best version of that particular plane. You know what that is, right?
I assume you mean the British pilot.
Fokkers, these nuts! Oh!
I thought you were going to pull up the British pilot, which I'll probably bring up in the after show. But in any case, welcome one and all on YouTube and in podcast land. You are listening to the Tangent Kings. Roll it. Welcome back once again to the Tangent Kings podcast. I am, of course, your humble servant, G. Michael Francis, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Mr. JJ Benks. How you doing today, sir?
Quite well, sir. How are you?
You might want to put that out before you light something on fire.
Yes,
Hey.
like my dignity. That burned out years ago.
No
That's
argument
a
there.
You lose all sense of dignity when you do showbiz.
Yeah, listen, people. I'm in showbiz. My soul took the red eye out of here years ago.
Huge. It's the biggest show since Richard Nixon. And you gotta say Richard Nixon was kind of a big deal, believe me. What do we got on today for Mike? Well, I think we have a guest, don't we?
We do. We have a man going by the name of Rico Velasquez. How you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm good. They're actually, the last name's not Velasquez, a common misconception. It's McNamara, but a lot of people don't know about the famous Venezuelan Irish.
I didn't even know about the Venezuelan Irish, and I'm Irish.
Well, I think I
That's
made
the
them
guy
up
with
just
a
now.
Polish background.
Poland.
Literally, the Our Lady of not Our Lady, the Black Madonna of Czestochowa.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast.
I won't.
No, but yeah, we figured we annoyed the YouTube overlords with our COVID video, which we're not going to disclose any details of. So we decided to really kick the hornet's nest. We're going to put Benks in Taiwan, and we're going to discuss something rather due to China. So, Mr. Rico, fill us in on what we're talking about because my brain is going about 5 million miles an hour.
Yeah, well, why don't I'll give you guys a little, for our listeners at home, which is everybody, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context. So a couple days ago, I was talking to my friend from college, Mr. Rico, and I said, why don't you come on the show and tell us a little bit about, because he's sort of a connoisseur on the geopolitical stuff in East Asia. So I thought, why don't you tell us kind of what's going on and fill us in and give us those of us who are unfamiliar with some of the actions that the CCP, or more specifically China as a whole, is taking right now to kind of assert its dominance and sort of change up the power structure in the particular region.
And before we do get into that, I just want to state our official position on the People's Republic of China.
Donald Trump don't trust China. China is asshole.
Oh, we don't trust China. Excellent. All right. So, Mr. Rico, you have the floor. So why don't you clue us in and let us know what you think?
All right. Well, I have been reading kind of just as I saw articles for the last year and a half about developments in China. Obviously, it's a very large nation. Something like 4 times as many people as we have. So, and we all remember growing up in 2K, the 20 teens, hearing that China is on the rise, and no longer that kind of country out there that's ruled by the crazy man, but a real contender. So
Still ruled by a crazy man.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid he might be a very
bother.
sane man.
A very what? I'm sorry.
A very sane man, who has a clear idea of how he should maneuver his country to attain and keep power in the future.
Okay, so he's manipulative. So was Stalin.
Yeah. So anyhow, the idea for this specific research project started because I was reading about Chinese aircraft carrier developments in the news the other day. I believe it was in a naval enthusiast website, and they were talking about the new Type 003 aircraft carrier that's being built in China. And so for this video, largely I'm going through information that is in the Congressional Research Service's March 9th, 2021 report on China naval modernization, implications for U.S. Navy capabilities, background, and issues for Congress. The link will be in the video. I sent that to you guys. So this was a really good source, actually. It's 67 pages long, and it essentially is an overview of most of the stuff that I have been seeing in just like news sources, like naval enthusiast websites, Washington Post, New York Post. No, I don't read the Washington Post. They have a paywall. Sorry, I was thinking of CNN. I was just thinking of mainstream news sources that don't have paywalls. But basically, all of them, you can see a lot of these kinds of reports coming out. So, the conclusion that this report gives is that China has dramatically expanded their naval capabilities since the mid-1990s when they began their modernization program. And their fleet is now significantly larger than the US's fleet. And their newer models are believed to be on par in terms of capabilities with us. And the long-term implications of that are that China will have a they call this the in the report an anti-access area denial force, or the A2AD force. And that's the primary goal, it's believed, of China's naval development, is to have this force essentially as a screen around the Chinese mainland and its outlying islands to prevent the U.S. Navy from operating there and to secure their waters against threat of force from us and the capability of the U.S. to intervene. Especially, it's believed the primary concern or goal in the next few decades is to prevent the United States from intervening in any kind of action taken against Taiwan, which, as your viewers probably know, China does not recognize Taiwan as a separate nation, and neither does the United Nations or most nations. So
Why is that?
Because didn't you
China
hear that guy?
has money.
China is at home.
It's because nobody wants to threaten their business interests in China, so nobody wants to recognize Taiwan.
Yeah, with plenty of labor, cheap labor.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you go for the bigger numbers?
Yeah, and I believe also, so if you're familiar at all with the history of Taiwan, it was formed as like the last bastion of the nationalists
The
during the Civil War.
Kuomintang, yeah.
Yeah, the Kuomintang. Chiang
Which is so
Kai-shek
fun to
led
say.
there. Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting factoid. Do you know what Chiang Kai-shek's religious preference was?
No, I don't.
He was a
who's Chiang,
Methodist.
who's Chiang Kai-shek? For
He was
those of you who
head
don't
of the
know.
nationalists.
He's the successor of Sun Yat-sen. So Sun Yat-sen successfully led the revolution against the imperial government in,
Yeah, the Qing
I believe,
dynasty in
1912,
1911.
So
1911.
So in the interest of, I don't want to lose our listeners, obviously. So if they're totally like, if they don't know anything about the history of China and Taiwan, could we get a little brief synopsis of?
Yeah. I'll go over that pretty quick if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Sure.
So, what you need to know about China is their culture has existed continuously in some form for thousands of years. So that kind of historical legitimacy gives them a strong sense of their place in history and their rightful place as a nation. And when the Western powers showed up and were essentially able to vassalize much of imperial China in the 19th century, they called that their century of shame. And just between the Opium Wars and instability in the imperial government, there were a lot of civil wars in China in the 19th century. And so all this conflict and the Western interventions in China created a crisis of confidence in the old imperial government. And so there was a civil war, and the leader of the Republican movement was named Sun Yat-sen, and he successfully overthrew the Qing dynasty and created the Republic of China. So,
which is the official name of Taiwan today.
Yeah.
But
so,
I think I jumped the gun a little here.
Yeah.
Only by a few decades. The Republic of China was like the legitimate government of China for a few decades, but it was still unstable and not very prosperous. And then during World War II, the Japanese began their invasion in 1933 and conquered large swaths of China. And even during the war against Japan, there was an emerging communist movement before the Japanese invasion. But the resistance to Japan was essentially split between the communists under Mao Zedong and the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, who was the successor to Sun Yat-sen. So he was the second president of China, I believe. And Chiang Kai-shek was the recognized leader of China by the Allies. But the communists were playing the war dirty, and they were participating, but letting the nationalists do the bulk of the work. And so when the Japanese left, the nationalists were very depleted. And if I recall, the U.S. was not willing to intervene in the Civil War in support of the nationalists. So the communists, having saved more of their strength over the war, were able to successfully take most of China. And the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek fell back to the island of Taiwan, which had until that point been a Japanese colony. So Taiwan has a very, I guess, unique cultural history in that there are indigenous Austronesian peoples who are like kind of like the native tribes, and then there's ethnic Chinese populations. I'm not sure if they're like Han or from southern China, because I believe that is a difference, Han and the southern Chinese. But workers who came over when it was Portuguese and Qing territory to develop the island. And then when the Japanese colonized it in the 19th century, lots of Japanese people came in, and then all of the nationalists fled to Taiwan after the Civil War. So to protect Taiwan, which was claiming to be, which calls itself the Republic of China still, and claims itself as the legitimate successor to the Republic of China. Well, not successor, because they say the Republic never stopped existing. It's just capital in Taipei now rather than Beijing. So,
which is the background behind me.
Yeah, Taipei 1. So the U.S. Navy under the Eisenhower administration started patrolling the Straits of Taiwan to make sure that the communists didn't invade. And during that period, we did not recognize the People's Republic of China, and the Republic of China, which had its capital in Taipei now, still held a seat on the United Nations Security Council. And it was when Nixon went to thaw relations with China to draw them out of the Soviet sphere of influence that was one of the conditions
which
of
backfired
China opening up.
miserably.
Mhm.
Yeah, hasn't it?
Do you
Yeah,
mind if I
you know something backfires when you have an authoritarian regime dependent almost entirely on slave labor,
Mhm.
and they have a seat on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations.
As does Cuba and
Yeah,
Venezuela.
Cuba, Venezuela,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
One thing I'll interject there too, because we're kind of in the 60s now for the timeline with Taiwan. What's not known commonly, just interject this little fact, was that China and Russia were actually on the verge of going to war.
Yeah,
Um,
because
with
Mao was a Stalinist and Khrushchev wanted to de-Stalinize, which really caused the fracturing between China and Russia.
And yeah, which is correct. And Mao was a petulant man, and he was extremely petty, like to say the least. More could be said, but I'll leave it at that. And they were actually conducted a few small border skirmishes, and that was about the extent of the conflict, to my knowledge. Um, and then suddenly Mao, during this time, said, just on a whim, said, I want to court favor with the United States and let's have Nixon over. So then Nixon went over there and they attempted to improve relations, which didn't sound like it went very well. So China has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rico, that China has been attempting since the People's Republic has been around, since they've had the military capability, they've tried to attack Taiwan a few times. There actually had some artillery pieces that I believe is the 60s, I want to say, were just taking pot shots at the island because they could. And then each time the United States has come around and protected and propped up Taiwan,
Yeah,
because it's not terribly far from mainland China.
What's essentially a 50-year hissy fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have definitely read about that. It's the near side of Taiwan has in living memory of its residents being hit with artillery strikes.
Yeah.
I think actually, no, I'm getting mixed up with North and South Korea.
Yeah, which was kind of a catalyst to, that factored into it as well, the Korean War. But we don't have to go into that conflict specifically. But the United States has been involved in the region before for several decades now, which kind of starts to bring us to now when China is very rapidly industrializing to the capacity that they are now just about on par with the United States in economic. How Rico, how close does China match the United States in terms of its economic and military presence right now?
Shoot, let me look that up. I have not looked at that recently. I do know they're expected to overtake us.
I think their military does have more bodies,
Mm-hmm.
but you also consider that the PLA is not actually loyal to the nation of the People's Republic of China. It's loyal directly to the Communist Party of China.
Right. Which
Well,
is,
I mean, in the eyes of the Chinese government, that is one and the same. They're a one-party state where
there's no
similar
loyalty
to the Red Army of the.
Yeah.
I just like saying it in Russian for whatever reason. It's so much more fun to say. The Kommunistической партии СССР.
That's cool.
So, Benks and Mike, as of 2019, the World Bank estimated U.S. GDP to be 21 trillion and Chinese GDP to be 14 trillion. So,
pretty close, but that's fairly easy
burn.
Well, yeah, when you're paying your workers like little to nothing in the name of the glorifying the state.
Well, it's slave labor, effectively.
Yeah.
This is the little article that this just popped into mind, and obviously, Rico will have you finish the rest of your topic, obviously. But there's China's, I would say it's its well-known policy of its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a massive infrastructure project across China, and it's spectacular in terms of what it's built. But what's not common knowledge is that it's been largely built by slave labor, and forced labor just in general. So
what people don't realize too,
we marvel at these interstates that they've built, but it's like this is unethically built, but that's not talked about.
Yeah, I think people need to know also the Belt and Road Initiative is not just in China, but it's essentially to make an economic sphere. There's actually some really great resources out there I can recommend. Do you ever watch the YouTube channel What If Alt Hist?
I don't believe so. Why don't you tell me?
I've
that,
seen
what
it a
that
few
is?
times. Like for example, I've seen the one where what if the Russian Empire was still standing today?
Oh, then
Yeah,
yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah.
he's done a lot of branching into just actual political and economic theory because he started reading about that stuff to research his videos. So let me grab some links here and I can put them in the chat.
Sure.
Because there's this one. It's 30 minutes long. It's called "Is China the Next World Power?" And in this, he is. Hang on.
And then we'll be sure to post it for our Spotify listeners. We'll be sure to post these links as well.
Yeah.
And
He's
in our
going
YouTube
over some of the
comments.
challenges they're
Correct.
facing because although we should be very concerned about the rise of China, they also have a lot of internal challenges that they need to face, like their one-child policy has created a demographic like a time bomb that is around the corner for them
Yeah, and
as
I think it's
people start
actually been
dropping
up
out of
to
the
a
workforce.
3-child policy now, as of 2020.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I read this one book. It was What to Expect When Nobody's Expecting to Expect, I believe. Let me look up the author.
Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast on Irish whiskey.
Yeah. Because I recall that China, while you looked it up, Rico, I recall China was saying that they're suddenly in support of the nuclear family, which is an interesting about face for the government. But what's interesting, because I was going to play John Stossel here and then be devil's advocate. Why is it bad that China is all of a sudden arming itself so rapidly? Like, what's so bad about it being a strong nation? Why is it so bad that it's suddenly the dominant power? I mean, it has been the dominant power, but what's the danger here? Isn't it good that China be a independent nation free from foreign pressures?
Well, I would say that is an unrealistic vision. There are very few nations that are large and powerful that want to just keep to themselves. If you look at even our history and our so-called isolationist phase, we were frequently interfering in the Caribbean nations and in Mexico.
Mhm.
And it's not in the nature of any
Isolationism, that
large,
worked like a
powerful
charm,
country
didn't
to
it,
remain
folks?
isolated.
Sorry. Sorry,
I think definitely it seems like there's less sentiment towards maintaining our role in the like global military system. I mean,
Mhm.
especially like when you see our generation, we want more socialistic policies. Uh, we
Yeah.
cannot maintain an ultra powerful military plus an expansive social welfare net at the same time, which means we'll have to, I tell our friends over in Europe to start paying their share, which, as you remember, that caused a lot of consternation when the last administration did just that. But
Mhm. There's this attitude that with the government, or in a lot, I would say, I would even go so far to say, is the average person's mind as far as government and business is concerned, where people think, oh, you're powerful, you have unlimited resources, right? This money supply is infinite, there is no end to it. Why should we?
We just need to raise the income tax to 500%, and we could cover all of the G6 defense budget, in theory.
Yeah, there's that attitude. As a very, very brief aside, Thomas Sowell mentioned that in his book To Conflict Divisions, which I highly recommend, where there is this attitude that people think that resources like that are absolutely without end. That's why, and the United States government has that policy, certainly as far as and that perspective as far as spending is concerned. They think they can just keep inflating the economy because they don't understand that there is a certain point where you can push that, but they keep acting like they can just spend what they want and they're perfectly okay because no one's going to challenge them. So as far as defense is concerned, there are limits, and especially if our generation, for example, the millennials, and if Gen Z takes after this trend, which I hope they don't, I hope they learn from the mistakes of history, and I hope they understand that if you have a socialist system, that it requires more resources than is available, and it ultimately You can't pay for all the stuff you want. You can't effectively pay for all this federal welfare and state level welfare. And you can't have your cake and you eat it too. You can only have one or the other. You eat your cake, or you don't eat your cake and you have your cake. You can't have it both ways. So it's interesting that how it's almost like as China seems to and has more crony capitalist policies and industrializes more, the United States has these anti-economic policies that constrain businesses and kill its GDP. I kind of wonder that if we went to war in a couple decades, what's going to happen?
Well, with
China
the
cannot
current
really-
Yeah.
state, I still think we still have a fair shot of coming out on top between during a conflict between us and the People's Republic of China.
Mhm.
If it might be costly, but I think we'll still win because I've briefly glanced at the notes that I was sent, and there's just not a lot of data for me to build a clear picture. It said that China has developed, I think it was on the order of 360, what is it, battle line ships?
Just various battleships.
Yeah, Rika, why don't you continue
Battle
with that?
force battle force ships, but
Yeah.
for all I know,
so
those could be torpedo boats by that definition.
Yeah.
there's a great table. I should have screenshotted it actually last night. I didn't think to do that. I couldn't copy it, but it's down at the end. Would you be able to throw this up in the video if there was a image available?
Yeah. Yeah, we can do a screen share for that.
Yeah, I'll just need the link.
Yeah, okay, here. Let me put it in the chat.
Okay.
And go to page. So that's the link to
I'll pull it up, Mike.
online
I got it.
PDF. And you
Okay.
just want to go to page 34 of that. So the report breaks down where their fleet development is, and it is clear that this is not going to be a global challenger to the United States soon, but in the event of conflict, it would be sufficient to keep us out of their waters for significant periods of time. So this
We could be
shows-
looking at another Cold War scenario, basically, is what I'm
Yeah.
looking at.
Yeah, well, I do want to say, like, even in the case of outright war, I can't ever imagine the United States alone invading mainland China. We would need to have all of Europe and India with us too, just because the population advantage is so lopsided in China's favor. I think
Granted,
invasion-
as I was trying to say, and I think I said this before, the PLA is essentially a massive, over-glorified militia, in my opinion. Mainly stemming from the fact that like 90% of their training is centered around political indoctrination.
But
I have not read much about the Chinese army. I would not assume they're going to stay that way.
mhm.
And
Well, I mean,
I would also point out that
any communist nation is heavily reliant on political propaganda, political brainwashing, if you will, to use Mao Zedong's direct term.
Yeah, so the question kind of comes down to is like they've got this military power. Do they have
Yeah.
have a lot of okay, finish, Rico. Go
well, I don't think it's right for us to think of China just as a communist nation. They're like pseudo-capitalist authoritarians. Like they're leaning on loyalty to the party. So in that sense, they are like communists, where it's all about loyalty to the party, which is also, similar to fascism and Nazism, where the entire society is based around loyalty to the party.
Mhm.
But they definitely
actually
are
an angle I
not
never
preaching
thought of.
anymore that egalitarian class warfare model. They're leaning more on nationalism because this is, I think, what his name's Rudyard Lane. That's what if all his real name. He's made that public knowledge. So one of the things Rudyard touched on in his "Can China become a superpower, or is it the next superpower?" which I have seen in other places, is that essentially China's economic miracle, the annual like 6% economic growth, has been going on so long and it's unsustainable, and they're approaching the year where their workforce starts to shrink. that they're trying to stoke up nationalism and reinvigorate party loyalty to kind of maintain their power when the economic growth contracts. Because essentially their implicit promise since since the excesses of the Maoist era were curbed back. I believe it was. Does the name Deng ring a bell to you? Spelled Denj.
No, it doesn't.
No.
Okay. Well, he was one of the Chinese premiers after Mao, and I believe it was
Oh, was that what Dang wasn't it?
Dane, maybe, yeah. They
yeah.
introduced like a
I remember him
essentially
actually.
an
Yes, I do remember him.
inter-party constitution after Mao because even the party realized the Maoist era was so crazy they couldn't do that again. And right now it's just Xi Jinping is trying to dismantle that and build a nationalist cult of personality around him. I saw one news article. The party in a province in southern China was going through Christian churches and replacing Christ with Xi Jinping, and Buddhist temples and replacing statues of Buddha with statues of Xi Jinping. So that's like they're building and re-expanding the surveillance state and trying to stoke nationalism because they're essentially trying to reinvigorate sentiments of loyalty towards the nation because they can't keep up their implicit promise that the authoritarian system is the only way to prosperity. So in that sense, I think in terms of like military advantages of communism versus capitalism, they're no longer really communists in practice. And just like when the Nazis invaded Russia, nationalism was what people fought for. Like they fought to defend Mother Russia, not Stalin.
Yeah, it's Deng Xiaoping, who is
Deng Xiaoping. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Soviets did do that in the Second World War. They went from, and I believe it was Dmitry Shostakovich, he was a composer of the era. He mentioned that the Soviet propaganda shifted from, it was stoking people to like hate certain political groups, and is very like the government was trying to keep you suppressed, terrified, demoralized, so you wouldn't rise up. And then all of a sudden it shifted from that, like, oh, we're going to build everybody up and talk about how great of a nation we're to defend it, because the Soviet citizens thought initially that, well, the Soviets are so terrible and we really despise them, but we can't do anything about it. Initially, it hoped that the Germans would liberate them, but then when they found out that the Germans were just as bad, and if not worse in some areas, and the Germans' idea of getting the local population to help them was, we're going to brutalize you into submission, just like the Soviets did. They thought, well, if we're torn between the two, let's just defend our homes. So that's really what it became. So it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if China is trying this attitude of nationalism to try to stoke that. The problem I'm concerned with, and I think the CCP is having problems with, is that the population just isn't motivated like that as a whole. It's like they just don't care. A lot of them, especially, for example, the younger generation, I mean, they see through a lot of the CCP's propaganda. They have a level of access to the internet where they can get independent information. They're no fans of the CCP. They're not going to keep this, oh, we're totally motivated by nationalism all of a sudden. They're like, why do we care what you think or want us to do?
I will point out that lately propaganda coming from the CCP isn't necessarily directed towards their own people anymore. Now it's directed towards demoralizing like the United States, the Republic of China, anybody who would interfere with that conflict. That's why you see a dramatic drop in allies for Taiwan, which I can't remember how many exactly they had right after the Civil War. I think it was upwards of 50, but now it's like 17 and still going down.
Yeah, because China's in a situation where on one side of it, it owns so many U.S. businesses and so many people. So many people are taking checks from China.
And so many of our businesses have shops set up in mainland China because, hey, you got millions of workers, pay them cheaply. Why wouldn't I do that?
Of course.
In a totally, in a loss, I'm not going to say laissez-faire. That's not the right word. And in anything goes, licentious market, I'm going to say, society. Why wouldn't I do that?
So needless to say, kind of the point we're kind of getting at too, it sounds like, is that because if China's propaganda is more focused on trying to demoralize Taiwan or in some capacity, because here's my concern too, is that I think what's going to happen with this president who's asleep at the wheel, who's not even totally coherent.
I like Ben Shapiro's nickname for him, President Houseplant.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He's not doing anything. He's just a figurehead for people, or Kamala Harris.
Yeah,
the thing
Kamala. Yeah, this is how the White House works nowadays. You got President Biden, and then you have Kamala Harris. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
I mean, and Joe Biden's he's always been someone you could easily manipulate his whole political career, but now he's not.
Yeah, your first hint when he can't even give a good speech when he has a teleprompter.
When he has a teleprompter, yeah, he has that, and when he's also derailing what he's doing to make extremely unsettling, disgusting, creepy comments to underage minors in front of a camera.
That too.
That doesn't help. But my point I was going to make was that with this administration and the powers that be in the deep state, for example, I think what's going to happen is that the CCP, I think what their strategy is going to be, we're going to deter the United States sufficiently to not get involved in Taiwan. We're going to take Taiwan and exert so much of our military to the point where we're going to take it, we're going to annex it like we've wanted to for the last several decades. And we're in a situation where we don't have enough. The state doesn't want to. They don't want to intervene already, and I think they're probably going to do what Russia did with the UK. It's like, we're going to wag our finger and you say, "Oh, you're a bad boy. You better not do it again." And I don't think they're going to do anything, to be honest with you.
Yeah, do not cross this red line, which I'm going to constantly shift back every time you take a step.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's what the U.S. is going to do right now, certainly with this present administration. So I kind of wonder if China is going to be doing something during this administration, because it would foil their plans if 45 got back into office in 2024 dramatically. I think that would set them back, because seems like the only person who's been hard on China for, like, I don't know, Rico, what do you say? Like, when was the last time we had a president that actually was hard on China and China actually backed down a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say Eisenhower.
Yeah, I don't really know anything before the 90s as far as policy towards China besides Nixon cooling relations, which was kind of dumb. But
yeah, that backfired spectacularly.
Yeah, to my knowledge, the Bushes, the Clintons, and Obama were all pretty for the free trade, like global economic liberalism that has enabled China, and didn't really want to confront it. Mm-hmm. Although I do wonder, just exploring my thoughts here, if China might find it in their interest to kind of be calm as long as there are less confrontational powers in office while they continue to build their military. So continue naval expansion and R&D while we still have the clear advantage, and just avoid confrontational moves, because that would help sell the case in the US and in Europe that they're not something to be concerned with. And then we'll all just be over here like, wow, why are those crazy Japanese and Koreans always on about China expanding? And then I can see, because obviously the first concern for any political system is generally going to be stabilizing its domestic situation. So if growth has slowed and the party feels it's viewed unfavorably, it might be very much in their immediate interest to stoke confrontation with the United States. Say, like the Spratly Islands and the Paracels, they can push claiming those and enforcing their exclusive economic zone as a point of national pride, because going back to the century of shame that the education system reminds them of, they I think because of their long history have a right to see themselves as especially deserving of a prominent place in the world. But the problem is for us is the political party that wants to claim that special place in the world. because they're very much against all the ideals that we have in the Western world. So I can see it. I think it really depends on the economic situation. You know, if China is recovering well from COVID economically and has nothing to gain from stirring a confrontation with the US, it would probably be wise of them to act a little tame while they continue to build their navy. And if it's less prosperous and people, you know, are unhappy, maybe it would be beneficial for them to stoke greater confrontations with their neighbors and with the US to try and rally the nation around the cause of defending Mother China.
Yeah. One point that I remember in your notes as well was that what China was kind of proposing was doing was having, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was having a lot of trucks with anti-ship ballistic missiles on it. So basically, it's almost.
Yeah,
that's
pretty cool. Like you could just pop a truck with some missiles up on an island and sink any aircraft carrier in 1,000 kilometers. Like it's essentially a giant screen around Chinese waters, 4,000 kilometers, because it points out later in the report that currently our aircraft carriers, the flight complements they carry, don't have the ability to really operate in that kind of range. So it would put carriers out of service, and I assume you would have to send in just surface vessels or submarines to try and clear out these missile platforms, these trucks.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up because, you know, it very rarely, if ever, does an aircraft carrier operate on its own.
Yeah. I'd love to see.
There's a fleet around them for a reason.
Yeah.
I'd love to see if some kind of think tank has published like an in-depth wargaming scenario on. Have you read the book Ghost Fleet?
No, tell me about it.
So it's kind of silly. It's like near future science fiction about a war between the United States and China, and I think it's a little sensationalized, but it's really interesting just because it does make you think about how the U.S. can operate in a world where the technological and economic advantage is no longer guaranteed to us. But essentially, it's a near future where there's a economic crisis around the world because somebody bombed out Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and threw the oil markets into like turmoil. And China discovers oil reserves in the Marianas Trench, and so they start a war with the U.S. to try and claim Guam and Hawaii as Chinese territories to secure energy independence from the Middle East. So essentially the book is that in their opening salvo, the Chinese knock out our satellite assets with a space laser. And so this is like it's a little sensationalist because I have a hard time believing China could send a space laser into space and nobody would know about it. But
I have a hard time believing Israel has a space laser.
I hope we all do.
I like to call it a Death Star.
The sphere.
It's the greatest Death Star of all time. Believe me.
Believe me, I know. If we never built it, I would. I love that, man. But I mean, in space, I mean, it's a little James Bondy sounding, that particular thing. But
that's a little beyond James Bond.
Well, I mean, I will say this though on that particular note was that we do have like a point laser defense technology we're developing right now that you can shoot a laser at a missile and it'll cause it to explode at long range. And military tech, that's just what we know about military technologies 40 years in advance, ahead of what we publicly know. It wouldn't surprise me.
And that's what we then there's what we don't know coming out of Stargate.
We would only use those technologies to confront the common challenges of humanity, not in our own national wars. We promised the Asgard. I mean, that's what I would assume.
Yeah,
clearly it's just a TV show.
Is that you?
We promised Thor, or we promised Michael Shanks with a head cold.
Yeah, can you imagine just some some shady guy in the CIA who like overthrew 20 governments by the time he was like 30 during the Cold War hears about these alien beams. He's like, we're going to use these against the Taliban. And Colonel Carter says, but we promised Thor. And he's like, you think I give a shit? You promised Thor?
He gets his bleep word mic. He's fine. But
Yes, I know, but it's surprising that he gets the first bleep and you don't.
yeah, I smoked a pipe before it came on, so I'm very reserved. But like what you were saying with the book, getting back to the book too, kind of the narrative there. The laser, they knocked out our satellites.
Yeah,
you were saying,
yeah.
Rico?
So they take the Hawaiian Islands and Guam, and I presume Samoa. Not that I know of anything of value in Samoa besides like pineapple trees.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think pineapples grow in bushes. So yeah, it's a very interesting book because he cites it all the way through like various news articles where he's been like reading about these technologies that either exist or have been like announced as plans by our government and the Chinese government. So everything is plausible. It just seems a little fantastical the way he portrays it, and a little too jingoistic go lucky when they finally liberate Hawaii from the Chinese. But it's a very good book just to give you insight into how war could change in the future. And
well, right. One thought kind of came to mind too when I was reading your notes was you kind of look at the conflict going on in Israel right now, where it's Hamas and what's the other group operating there?
I think you're thinking Hezbollah, and that's Lebanon.
Yeah. So Hezbollah. So they were shooting rockets into Israel, and what one analyst pointed out was that so Israel has this Iron Dome defense system, which is very sophisticated, but is extremely expensive. Versus it's a lot more cost effective for them to just fire rockets into it, because it's more cost effective for them to do that. And then drain out Israel's reserves of munitions for this system before they could restock. And then once it's drained out, they don't have that defense system anymore. In a similar capacity with China and the United States, it's cheaper for them to have anti-ship ballistic missiles on trucks versus a carrier and its task force.
Yeah, a truck takes a driver and maybe a crew of 3 to like man the weapon system, and a ship takes millions of dollars at least, and a whole crew of tens.
And the fuel and the
most ships nowadays.
Okay,
I was about to stub my toe on a bad point, but
Just
most
think
of
of
our
the
fleet
morale
is
effect.
nuclear powered. So
What?
I was just pointing out that most of our fleet is nuclear powered.
Well, I meant
yeah.
Not like in terms of, I mean like jet fuel, for example.
True.
Is kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, airplanes aren't nuclear powered.
So this is actually
munitions.
something I noticed in terms of just China defending its own claims to its near waters. Because as I was reading, it did point out that they do not yet have a nuclear powered sub. I forget which page. Sorry, they do have nuclear powered subs. It says that. I think they were the Type 75s. They have ballistic missile submarines. It says 10 by 2040 in this PDF right now. 2020, it says for the Jin class, JIN. So they do have nuclear powered submarines, but the report says that China has only announced plans to build a nuclear powered aircraft carrier and has pushed those plans back publicly due to budgetary constraints. However, I think in terms of output, if China is only trying to keep us out of their near waters, they have a definite numbers advantage in that their stuff is only diesel powered, so it takes less time to build. Our nuclear powered ships take years and years to build, and they just put out this Type 3 aircraft carrier that they're building has similar displacement to our Gerald Ford classes. I read that in a news article comparing them on the Naval Enthusiast blog.
Yeah.
And so they have similar displacement, but theirs builds much faster because I would assume they have lower safety standards for their shipyards.
And not to mention, whatever their complement of aircraft and sailors are.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. But that's
Well,
another
Yeah,
interesting thing.
just because the ship has a similar displacement doesn't necessarily mean it takes the same number of crew, same number of
No, this is
same
the other
payload.
thing. In the report, they say that the Type 03, which is being built right now, will incorporate electromagnetic launches. So the first domestically built aircraft carrier was the Shandong, and that is the ski jump, and that's what most nations with aircraft carriers use. And our aircraft carriers all use catapults. And once they have a catapult launching ship, catapult launching systems allow the aircraft carrier to employ fighters with much heavier loads and weights. So in that sense, presumably they'll have to stay closer to port and resupply more often because they don't have a nuclear generator to power the ship and they're using diesel. But it sounds like in terms of complement, they could theoretically be equal. And so then I was trying to look up the F-22 and the China's J-15. I don't know if you guys have read much about the F-35. Have you seen anything in the news about carrier variants for it?
The extent of my knowledge is with the F-35. It's gotten to be there's a lot of problems with them still.
I didn't even know there was a carrier variant.
Yeah, see, so I'm not sure if we even have that yet. So from what I gather, our most recent this is something that needs to be fact checked because I read this article like while I was traveling months ago on my phone and forgot to save it. But that look up, I'll see if I can find the comparison here. I believe it was the F-22 Raptor versus the Chengdu J-20 versus F-22. I believe that's the comparison I was looking for. And there's one from the South Morning China Post.
That's not biased at all.
Yeah. So let me drop this link in the chat. I believe this is the one I was reading.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll include it in the show notes, but we are starting to run low on time.
Yeah. Okay. One little point I wanted to make kind of too. From a strategic standpoint, you also have to factor in, obviously, regardless of kind of military capabilities, what you also have to factor in this whole situation too is we can produce, we can spend enormous amounts of money on high quality military equipment, for example. But the question is that if it takes us longer to produce them and China can inflict sufficient casualties on them, what you're going to start dealing with is kind of and they can produce more of their cheap or inexpensive or frankly inferior quality stuff that's just good enough that they can produce in mass. It's kind of that's
granted this is all resting on one really big if.
Well, my whole
if they manage to get close enough to our carrier group, if they manage to lob a missile towards it.
The if is it's not the if, it's the ballistic missile trucks. That's a definite because the report says that.
But they still have to land the shot past. They still have to land the shot past the carrier group.
Well, to kind of finish my point here too, we're not talking about just the carrier group kind of being off in Hawaii or closer to base. Is going to be in a situation where, if you're dealing with a war over Taiwan, something like that, right? You're going to have the U.S. is going to be dealing with much larger supply lines, right? Versus China can get away with lower quality stuff because they have bases in the area, they've got repair facilities in the area, they have stuff that can refuel a lot more, rearm a lot more easily than our groups can, for example. Like the only situation that I think we'd have a sufficient advantage is if our stuff just completely demolished their equipment and decisively dealt decisive blows to them over and over again. Because China just needs to deter us enough to stay out of the waters, number one. But if you have an armed conflict, it's going to be, my concern is it being a lot like what happened in the Second World War, where Germany had very good quality tanks, not the best in the war, that was the Soviet Union, but for a lot of the war, they had a lot of good equipment and very, very good infantry fighting forces, but they couldn't sustain it, and they didn't have the industrial capability to keep up with the Soviet Union, for example, but also United States, so we could produce tanks why produce, you can produce your heavy tanks, but you can produce 4, 5, 6, 10 Shermans for every one Panzer IV, every Tiger tank. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately more effective long-term for the war effort than just having one tank. Yeah, it's great, but it breaks apart all the time. So my whole concern is also that industrial side of it as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things they point out in the report is that a lot of the fleet growth in China has been that like they're not matching us on the really sexy assets like aircraft carriers and submarines yet, but they're just pumping out masses of missile frigates that might not displace as much as ours, but there's just more of them. So, you take out one of our ships, presumably that's a lot more missiles you're taking out of the fight than if you take out a Chinese frigate, because
Yeah.
they are displacing theirs and not investing as much per ship.
Yeah, it's like, to even use a StarCraft example, it's almost like the Zerg versus the Protoss. It's like I can build like
Yeah.
10, 20 Zerglings for every one of your units. And to make this
Hey.
final point too, and this is the final point too, is you have it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Soviets' Katyusha trucks in World War II, which were just basically, it's a truck, like a truck from the 1920s or 30s. It just puts some rocket launchers on it that can just spread out everywhere. Obviously, it's more sophisticated now, but it's like basically an armored truck with a missile on it, and then you back that up. Can you imagine how cheap that is to produce in mass?
Yeah, I can imagine. Just to illustrate the supply line difficulty, the distance from Hawaii to Taiwan is 8,197 kilometers, and the distance from Hainan, which is their main naval base, to Taiwan is 1,226 kilometers. So that kind of just like puts in perspective. It does point out in the discussion portion, which starts around page 39, talking about what has been reported. They point out that one of the strengths of the United States in a possible conflict regarding Taiwan is that we expect to be able to rely and lean on allies like Japan and Australia. So, like Japan, there's a massive naval base in Yokohama that is much closer to Taiwan than, Hawaii is, that presumably we could lean on.
Mm-hmm.
Unless China can pressure Japan into being uninvolved.
It's certainly a possibility, but yeah, we should probably wrap this up because I think we're actually in overtime now. So that was a good discussion. Very good. And Benks, if you don't mind, I actually have a quote lined up. If
Okay, good, because I didn't.
Good. Now, just sort of change topics, like some inexperienced driver trying to drive an Aston Martin and grinding the hell out of it.
Do you know from experience?
I will neither confirm nor deny. But no, it's this devotion to the Catholic Church, and is especially highlighted for the month of June. It's called the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And the main story behind it comes from a saint. Names I'm blanking on the name. Let me. I have the article pulled up on Church Militant. It's Saint. It was here. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. Please do not make a joke out of that. But basically, one thing he said, and I think a lot of this could apply to our world today. He said to her, "Behold the heart that has so loved men that it has spared nothing, even to exhausting and consuming itself, in order to testify to its love. And in return, I receive from the greater part only ingratitude by their irreverence and sacrilege, and by the coldness and contempt they have for me in this sacrament of love. But what I feel most keenly is that it is hearts which are consecrated to me and treat me thus." And it kind of also reminds me of Our Lady of Fatima famously said to the three children that Russia will, if Russia is not converted and the world does not return to God, then Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. And I think we're seeing also a succession to that through the People's Republic of China, which I know is kind of like a duh point, but
But anyway,
yeah, Rico, I think you could see my point.
Yeah.
Least.
What's the runtime on this meeting? Not the recording session, just the meeting itself now.
Well, I started the meeting about 20 minutes before we started recording, and we're running at 1:45.
Woo, for recording?
No, I started about 20 minutes. I started recording
yeah.
about 20 minutes after
and we edit stuff down too. So, but yeah, we had a great discussion. Thanks for coming on, Rico.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun having you on. Never talked about this topic before. I'll definitely have you on sometime again, please. And thanks for sharing your thoughts. And I hope you have a very fantastic evening, sir.
All right. Hey, folks, remember my name is Rico McNamara. Follow me on Instagram, YouTube. Remember to hit the subscription bell and like and subscribe.
You don't have any of those, do you?
Yeah, not under the name Rico McNamara.
Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, the whole shebang.
Hey, Rico, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think China has ligma?
What?
I think they have bofa.
Oh!
Anyway, we are the Tangent Kings. We love you guys. Pax et bonum!
Hey folks, if you like our podcast, be sure to check us out on Facebook and also check us out on our podcast platforms, namely Anchor, Spotify, Google Cast, and others you can also find on Anchor. God bless.